Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our free February webinar, QBO Cleanup, the diagnostic skills every bookkeeper should know. Thank you for joining me today. And as you're joining and entering the webinar, let me know in the chat where you're joining from. You know that I always like to know where you're joining from, and I always get excited that you're joining me today because otherwise it feels very lonely talking all to myself. We had over 700 of you sign up for the webinar, which is amazing. And here we go. We have Jody. Oh my gosh, it's going so fast. Okay, hold on. Elizabeth from Rockport, Texas. Audrey from Utah. Shannon from Lake Mary, Florida. Leah from Longmont, Colorado. Denise from New York. Jessica from California, David from Venice, Florida, Kiso from Northern California, Carrie from Vermont, April from Missouri, Mark from Denver, Carolyn from Indianapolis, Caitlin from Maybank. I've not heard of that in Texas. I'm going to have to look it up. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. Jennifer from Mesa, Arizona, Eric from Auburn Hills, Michigan, Ronald from Batangas, the Philippines. Wow. Thank you for joining us, Ronald. Minerva, also from the Philippines, from I think you would say Quezon City, Philippines. Karen from Homosassa, Florida. Wow, you guys are really testing me now. Samuel from Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome. Jennifer from Utah. Tomika. Hi, Tamika from South Carolina, Bree from Gulfport, Mississippi, Jason from Saskatchewan. We got people from all over the world. And as I said, it just brings me so much joy to know that you're joining me from all around the world and that I'm able to help you. This is what I live for. So thank you for joining. So once again, and let me get this a little bit out of the way here. There we go. So thank you for joining us for our free February 2025 webinar, QBO Cleanup, the diagnostic skills every bookkeeper should know. So super excited to bring you this new webinar. So this is brand new content. You haven't seen it on YouTube. You haven't seen it on a previous webinar. So I'm very excited about that. And let me see, hold on. Advance to the next page. Okay. And let me just check the chat. I see a couple of you from Houston down the road from me here in Texas. So again, thank you for joining. So my name is Veronica Wasek, and I am the founder of 5-Minute Bookkeeping. So you can find me on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all the social media channels, 5-Minute Bookkeeping. And then you can find all of my free and paid courses on 5MB Academy, which I also founded. I'm known as the unstoppable introvert. Probably a long story behind that I won't cover today. And as you can see, I like to do artwork in my spare time when I get time. I get very busy nowadays because my husband and I now have a farm. We've had it for about 3 years. And we're building a house there, and hopefully it'll be done in April. So we're getting very, very close. And so the farm is halfway between Houston and San Antonio, right in the middle. So I'm right between Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, Texas. So we're very excited about going to live out in a rural area and enjoying all of the fresh air and the quiet because I'm an introvert and I love quiet. Some administrative announcements for you today. This presentation is subject to copyright. You may not record the presentation. You may not share it on social media. And you may not share the handout on social media. We will have a handout, so you should be able to see a link to the handout in your webinar window. If for some reason you can't find it, we will email the recording of today's webinar and the link for you to download the handout as well. So you'll normally get that within 24 hours. You can use the chat to talk amongst yourselves. And I'm about to sneeze. Hold on just a moment. Okay, it's probably going to try to come back. So in the chat, you may chat, or if I ask a question or something, you can use the chat for that, or to talk amongst yourselves. But if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A tab. There's a Q&A tab within your webinar window, and you should be able to see that. If for some reason you put a question in the chat, my wonderful assistant, Jill Keel, will move it over to the questions. But I will be answering the questions from the Q&A tab. And as I said, Jill, my assistant, is joining us today. So she'll probably say hello to you in the chat, and she may share links and things that I will be talking about during the webinar. So what are we covering today? Well, we will discuss why diagnostic skills are a game changer for bookkeepers. We'll talk about building a strong foundation and understanding the workflows in QuickBooks. We will discuss solving the mystery of undeposited funds in QuickBooks Online, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So let's start with why diagnostic skills are a game changer. One thing that I realized as I started to do cleanups was that I had to become like a doctor and to really develop the skill set to be able to not just look at like what is the mess that I'm looking at, but really know why things are happening. And actually, we as bookkeepers and accountants, we see all the problems. For example, and let me know in the chat, have you come across these things? Hundreds of uncleared banking transactions, old transactions in undeposited funds, uncategorized income, uncategorized expenses, transactions in opening balance equity, miscategorized expenses, unapplied cash payment income, unapplied cash bill payment expenses. How about app integrations gone wild? I've dealt with some of those in the past. So absolutely. And Tabitha says all of them. Anna, same thing, all of the above. Annie says absolutely. You know what it is. All the problems that bookkeepers see. We see it all. But we tend to see the symptom of the problem. We see it, or like, okay, it's all messed up, want to run away. But we don't necessarily know how to troubleshoot the problem and how to find the cleanup solution. So again, it's like we see the big mess, but why is it there? How did it get there? That's where those diagnostic skills come into play. And that's why I put together a diagnosis formula to be able to identify the problem or the symptom of the problem, identify the cause, like what really caused that problem, what made this, like why are there so many uncategorized expenses? What is causing the problem? And then identifying the cleanup solution. And give me 1 second to change my arrow options. There we go. So again, identify the problem, know what caused the problem, and then identify a cleanup solution. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, sorry, my presentation was not going forward. All right, so let's go through an example of something you probably see all the time. Hundreds of uncategorized transactions, right? That is the problem that we see when we look at a client's QuickBooks. So what is the cause of the problem? Because sometimes I see people say that, QuickBooks put this in uncategorized, or QuickBooks did this. Well, QuickBooks, yes, sometimes it does things by itself, but most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time the client is doing something, or we're doing something, maybe an app is doing something, but something is causing that problem to be there. So typically speaking, when we see hundreds of uncategorized expenses, the cause of the problem is usually because you have an untrained client who's going into QuickBooks and just adding transactions from the bank feed without looking at the account category. So they're not reviewing the account category in the bank feeds before adding a transaction. So that's actually the cause of the problem. So once we understand the cause of the problem, then we can come up with the cleanup solution. In this case, we have two solutions. One is to just clean up the transactions. We need to go in and recategorize all the transactions for the client. And then the other solution is to prevent the problem from happening again. So let's say that either we prevent it by, hey, we're going to do your bookkeeping going forward, or if the client will continue to categorize their own transactions, or maybe they have an employee who's doing this and they just don't know any better, then we need to prevent the problem from happening again by training the client, or as I said, just do the bookkeeping for them. So the solution is really to solve the problem. And this is an opportunity for us to add on additional services, because as I said, we can train the client, we can show their people what to do, we can show the client what to do correctly, we can prevent the problem from happening again. Sometimes it's just they don't have the right processes in place. Sometimes they're doing things out of order. Or we can do a cleanup or a catch-up. So as I said, once we understand what is causing the problem, then we can step in and become advisors. We can be consultants, we can be trainers, we can also clean up the book. So we have opportunities for additional services. Now let's talk about understanding workflows in QuickBooks. This is one of the key ways in which we can confidently identify the cause of the problem and ultimately find the cleanup solution. We need to understand the workflows in QuickBooks. And when I talk about workflows, I'm talking about the steps or the things that happen in QuickBooks in order, or the transactions that are in QuickBooks. There's a certain order to those transactions, and we'll go into that in just a moment. But really, there's more to QuickBooks than working on the bank feeds, because most everybody, and especially business owners, just think that, hey, I just have to go to the bank feed and I need to click add or match. But they have no idea if you click add on a transaction, what is that doing in the background? If you click add on money received, what is that doing in the background? Is it creating a deposit? Is it creating a sales receipt? Or if I click add on an expense transaction, is it entering a check? Is it entering a bill payment? Is it entering an expense transaction? Or sometimes, especially when we're matching, what is it matching to? What does that even mean? So again, there's more to QuickBooks than working on the bank feeds. And if we don't understand what we're doing, or if the client doesn't understand what they're doing, this is where all the problems occur. So the root cause of the problem is just not understanding the workflows in QuickBooks. So let's go through an example of expense workflows in QuickBooks so we can look at it in more detail here. So one workflow is vendor bills in QuickBooks. So we need to understand what happens when a vendor bill is entered, what is the next transaction that should happen after a vendor bill is entered, and what is the next step. So in this case, the workflow is that a vendor bill will be entered, then you will pay the bill in QuickBooks, or you're the client, and then you have to match that bill payment in the bank feed. It sounds simple, right? But somehow it gets all messed up. Okay, so let's talk about the right way to do it. So in QuickBooks, we have a bill and we have pay bill. So fairly simple for many of you. This may be like, yeah, I see this all the time. Somehow for clients, it gets all messed up. They just don't know. Okay, so but fairly easy. We enter bill, enter pay bills. And then you have, again, a bill that we're entering and then a bill payment. It seems simple enough, right? But somehow there's a problem, something got messed up, the client did something. Most of the time, they don't even know what they did because they click here, they click there, they delete this, they add that. And all of a sudden, we have, when we look at an expense account, we see a duplicate. So we have the same amount twice. So we have a duplicate transaction. One is an expense transaction type and one is a bill transaction type. So somehow we ended up with a bill and with an expense, and we have a duplicate. So now we need to understand, how did that get there? Because I can see that happened. I can see that, I probably need to get rid of a duplicate, but how did it get there? Once we gain that deeper understanding of why is this happening, how did it happen, we become much better at doing cleanups and even diagnosing problems. So what was the cause of the problem? There was a wrong workflow being used. So in this particular workflow, the vendor bill and the bill payment were entered in QuickBooks, that is correct. But somehow the client went into the bank feeds and they added an expense in the bank feed. And again, don't ask me how they do it. Because even, like I said, even they don't know sometimes, like, how did you do that? I don't know. It's just like, was there and I clicked and okay, that's what happened. And that's usually what they tell you. So in this wrong workflow, I'm in the bank feed. And even though like it tells you found a match, but somehow like they don't see that and they're just going to go into that transaction in the bank feed and categorize it to an expense account. And so, as I said before, then we end up with duplicate expenses. So what is the cleanup solution then? We need to delete the expense transaction. And then we need to go to the bank feed and match to the bill payment. So that by deleting the expense transaction, we get rid of the duplicate. And then by correctly matching the transaction, then we're good to go. So in case you don't know how to delete a transaction in QuickBooks, you pull up the transaction, you go to at the bottom where it says more, and then you will select delete, and then that will delete notice that this is an expense transaction, it will delete that. And then in the bank feed, you will find that transaction and just match it, and you're good to go, as I said. As you're doing this, because, we can get really happy at deleting transactions, we need to consider whether transactions have already been reconciled in the bank account reconciliation, because sometimes the wrong transaction or the duplicate transaction ends up being reconciled in the bank reconciliation. And so if you delete that reconciled transaction, of course, that will affect the bank reconciliation. So this is where we have to, once we start understanding these workflows and understanding some of the consequences of, well, if I go in and delete this, will this affect a bank reconciliation? So just wanted to give a word of caution here. So let's go over other workflows in QuickBooks. And this is all in your handout. So I've listed for you the most common workflows in QuickBooks. I don't want to spend a ton of time on them because, they're in your handout, but I'll just quickly go through them. So as we talked about already, the workflow for vendor bills, you will enter a vendor bill, enter a bill payment, and then match it in the bank feed. For expenses and checks, you will typically, you can disagree about adding a check, beforehand, but we're assuming that you added it in the bank feed, and that will result in an expense or check transaction in QuickBooks. For undeposited funds, we should have a customer invoice, a customer payment being posted to undeposited funds. Then we should have a deposit, and then we should match that deposit in the bank feed. For sales receipt, you will enter a sales receipt and then match that in the bank feed. And then I've listed several additional income workflows for things that maybe are like, let's say your workflow for QuickBooks payments, third-party merchant services, and other things. So I'll just give you that list to review for later. As I said, it'll be in your handout. I love this. I'm laughing because I hadn't seen this, where it says that the income stream is cash, the payment is cash, and the workflow, I just said good luck, because it's so hard to get clients to comply or do anything if they're paying cash. So yeah, I thought that was fun. All right, so that's the second page of your income workflows. So I'd like to talk about now undeposited funds and solving the mystery of undeposited funds. So by far the biggest problem when we're working with QuickBooks and when we're doing cleanups is that undeposited funds gets completely messed up. And in fact, in addition to undeposited funds, many of the transaction of these workflows that I was talking about and the broken workflows, business owners make similar mistakes. And so once you start seeing a certain type of problem, like we said before, uncategorized transactions, you'll see that over and over and over. And so once we learn to identify the problem, identify the reason for the problem, and we know what the cleanup solution is, then we become much better at diagnosing problems as well as doing the cleanups. But as I was saying before, undeposited funds is like the number one area where you will see lots of problems and big problems, usually lots of transactions and old transactions, lots of dollar amounts going to undeposited funds, and it gets all messed up. So that's why I wanted to cover it specifically. So we're going to go through a scenario and kind of play detective together. Okay, so in this scenario, we have a client company that provides consulting services. They invoice customers out of QuickBooks and receive payments via ACH, check, and QuickBooks payments. And they enter customer payments to undeposited funds. Okay, so this is a client that they provide services. They're invoicing through QuickBooks and attempting to follow the workflow. But there's a problem. When we looked at their QuickBooks, we saw old transactions in the undeposited funds account. And then when we look at their income on an accrual basis, it appears to be duplicated. Their income is way high. They don't know why. And one thing to note in terms of diagnostic skills, and when you're talking to prospective clients, they're going to tell you these things. Oh, my undeposited funds has a huge balance and my income is duplicated. I don't know why. Okay, so when you hear those two things, that is a sign of a workflow problem with undeposited funds. Okay, so that is the root cause of the problem. Okay, so in this particular case, when we go to bank deposit in QuickBooks, so we click on the plus sign or plus new, and then we go to bank deposit, then it'll open the bank deposit window. It's going to show you everything that is in undeposited funds. When you look at the balance sheet, there'll be a balance in undeposited funds. So when we go into bank deposit, open the bank deposit window, it's going to show you what is in undeposited funds. And you will likely see, as I said, lots and lots of old transactions, multiple pages. Let me know in the chat if you've come across that before. Lots of old undeposited funds. And the client that, like, how do I get rid of this? I don't know how to get rid of it. Sometimes a CPA will try to help them and put a journal entry in there because that'll clean it up, and that doesn't clean it up. And so, it's one of those things that it lingers for years because nobody knows how to clean it up. And especially, nothing against CPAs, I am one, but untrained accounting professionals, so if they're untrained in QuickBooks, sometimes mess it up more because they don't know how to make it go away. and the client wants it to go away. All right. So this is again the problem that we're seeing. And then when we go into the income account, so this is their consulting income account, we see that there are a lot of deposits recorded to their income account as well as invoices. Now, as I mentioned before, we have a client who provides a service and they invoice through QuickBooks. So the proper transactions that we should see in QuickBooks when they're doing that, when they're invoicing through QuickBooks, we should see an invoice. We should not see a deposit in consulting income. Again, if you're invoicing through QuickBooks, okay, sometimes for e-commerce and other things, we may see a deposit. But if a client is invoicing through QuickBooks, we should only see invoices and not deposits in their income accounts if they're following the correct workflow. So to review the correct workflow for undeposited funds, there should be a customer invoice, okay, that will get recorded to income. There should be a customer payment that is posted to undeposited funds. Then there should be a deposit transaction. And then we should be matching that deposit in the bank feed. So essentially, this is going from invoice and accounts receivable when we enter, so the customer invoice is recording income. So it's increasing income and it's increasing accounts receivable. The customer payment decreases accounts receivable and increases undeposited funds. The deposit increases the bank balance and decreases undeposited funds. So by then everything's recorded and we just have to match it in the bank feed. Okay, so it sounds simple, but it gets messed up all the time. So how does it get messed up? What is causing it to get messed up? Well, the wrong workflow is used. So what happens is that your client enters a customer invoice. The client enters a customer payment to undeposited funds. So we're good so far. But then everything breaks down because they go in the bank feed and they add income from the bank feed. And when they add income from the bank feed, they're entering a deposit. So going back to what is the transaction from the bank feed doing? It's entering a deposit transaction in the income account. Okay? All right. So now let's put the correct workflow next to the wrong workflow so we can see what went wrong and we can have them side by side. So everything's good. We entered, or the client entered a customer invoice in the correct workflow. We're good. In the incorrect workflow, we're still good. Then they entered a customer payment in both workflows. We're good. And then it breaks down because they bypassed the deposit. They didn't match it in the bank feed. They just added it to income in the bank feed. So again, we're duplicating income. And Bree says her best practice is to bypass undeposited funds. And you can sometimes, but sometimes you still have those clients that are receiving multiple invoice payments and such that to where you have to group all of the deposits together. Okay, so now we understand what went wrong. And now we have to clean it up, okay? So we have two ways of cleaning it up. One is to fix source transactions, and the other is to do a negative deposit. In the past, I taught you how to do a dummy bank account process. I now have a new process, the negative deposit method, so I'll share that with you. So when we, in terms of cleaning up undeposited funds and looking at fixing source transactions, that means that we have to, for every deposit that was made, we have to figure out Okay, which customer was it for? What invoices were they paying? What date did this happen? So you have to have source documentation for all of this. Copies of checks deposited, the deposit slip, maybe merchant payments, payment processor payments. You have to have something that tells you how to record this deposit that we don't know what it's for. And you also must be able to correctly record all of the source documents. So you have to be able to essentially have all the details available and have all the time in the world to get it all entered because it wasn't entered properly. It is the most accurate way to fix undeposited funds, but it's also the most time consuming. And realistically, clients rarely have the documentation for their deposits. They just don't know what makes up a deposit. But if a client happens to have it all, this is my preferred method would be to do it this way. But I don't think I've ever come across a client who ever had the backup for all their deposits. So then we have the negative deposit method. So this is a quick way to clean up undeposited funds when source transactions don't exist. It is a less accurate method, and it assumes that income was duplicated, which in the example that I showed you, yes, income was actually duplicated. So let's go through the negative deposit method, and then we'll go through an example. So these are the steps to do the negative deposit method. So we're going to open a bank deposit in QuickBooks. We're going to select the old transactions in undeposited funds that we want to clean up. We're going to add a negative deposit to sales of product income in add funds to this deposit, and I'll show you that in a moment. The net deposit amount should be 0. And then the adjustment that even though it says 0, there will be an adjustment recorded to sales of product income. Now, you may use a different sales account, but so it'll be an some sort of income account, sales account. But the result of it is that it's going to and actually will decrease sales of product income or an income account of your choosing. So let's go through an example. So we're going to go to QuickBooks, to the plus new button, select bank deposit. So this is going to allow us to then see what's in undeposited funds. So we're going to select, in this case, 2 transactions from over a year ago that are old. We don't, we need to get these cleaned up. There's no other documentation for them. So we will select those transactions, and then we will add a negative deposit at the bottom. So in the received from, you'll put your customer name. In the account, you will use either sales of product income or another income account. In the description, we'll add clear out old undeposited funds. And then we are going to, for the amount, enter the negative of the total. You notice the total of the transactions I selected is $6,050. So then I'll put a negative $6,050, and that will give me a 0 deposit. So this will then clear out the transactions in undeposited funds that I selected. So it'll clean up undeposited funds, but just be aware that it will then show a negative adjustment. So it will be a debit or a negative into the sales of product income account. So assuming that we were doing the cleanup, let's say that we have old undeposited funds all from 2024, and we clean them up, and we end up with this negative adjustment to the sales income account, that in theory, if everything happened in 1 year, all those deposits that I showed you earlier will be offset by this negative entry that I make, and should net out to 0 in theory. But sometimes what we see is that we have undeposited funds there for years and years. So at that point, we need to really consider the effect of, okay, can we adjust that in prior years? There are a lot of considerations for that. and I can cover that in another webinar because it would take me a long time to explain that. But basically, we need to consider whether a tax return has been filed in previous years, whether we're dealing with a sole proprietorship or an S Corp, C Corp, or a partnership here in the US. So we need to consider whether that adjustment, if we make it in prior years, may affect other tax returns, okay? So that's why I put a little disclaimer here. Consider the effect of adjusting prior year undeposited funds and how it may affect prior tax returns or the reconciliation of the balance sheet. Here in the US, we reconcile the balance sheet in QuickBooks to Schedule L on an S Corp, C Corp, or partnership tax return. All right. So some key takeaways for you today. We need to look at the problem. So what is the problem? Identify the cause of the problem, then identify the cleanup solution. That solution may include training your client, training perhaps their team members, helping the client to prevent things from happening in the future. If they're doing something wrong, help them to prevent that. And also doing a cleanup and a catch up. And honestly, this train, prevent, and clean up and catch up is what I did for many, many years. And when I started my bookkeeping business, the services that I provided were training and coaching clients on how to use QuickBooks. The prevent part was I was a consultant, essentially providing consulting services to clients who would come to me and say, "Oh, my undeposited funds is all messed up." Okay, I can see the source of the problem. So now we're going to help you implement these changes. I will determine the correct workflow. I will come in and train your team members. I will ensure that you're not making these mistakes again. I will clean up what you have done, and then I will continue to review your books going forward. Or my team and I can do the bookkeeping for you. Really having this skill set allows you to really open up all of these other services, as well as just getting through cleanups. Okay. But it really, we talk a lot in this industry about, oh, you need to be an advisor and you need to, do advisory. Sometimes advisory is just, we need to train the client how to do things correctly. And then really stepping in as consultants or specialists to help them to really fix the things that they're doing wrong. Many times, for example, when I used to do a lot of consulting for companies that had inventory, and they would always have negative inventory. And we always were wondering, why do you have negative inventory? And so after I consulted with enough companies, I realized that, okay, the reason you have negative inventory is because the inventory order that you placed just arrived and nobody entered the inventory in QuickBooks. And so then they're selling stuff, but they're not entering the inventory. So sometimes it's obvious, like, wow, okay, but they just don't realize that, okay, that's going to cause you to have negative inventory in QuickBooks. So as I said, that once you start seeing certain kinds of problems and you understand why they're happening, then you're able to really help a lot of clients, as I said, with a lot more services. All right. So what is the best way to develop your diagnostic skills is to perform paid diagnostic reviews for every cleanup or catch-up client. So that's how I started. Initially, I was doing them for free initially because I thought, nobody's going to pay me to do a paid diagnostic review. But in fact, after I realized that I was providing a valuable service to my clients, then I started charging for paid diagnostic reviews. And really, as I said before, I felt like I was this doctor or a surgeon going in and identifying the problems, and knowing why they happened. and then having cleanup solutions. And again, because I was seeing the problems over and over. I'd like to share with you some resources. So if you would like to go to my YouTube channel, it's at 5mbvideo.com. I have a playlist there for QuickBooks Online Cleanup and Diagnosis. So I go a lot more in depth about going through certain accounts and diagnosing problems. So you have a link to that. You can also look at my free and paid courses on 5MB Academy and sign up to be notified about my latest content, webinars, and courses. And you have the link for that as well as a QR code. And I'm sure that Jill is probably sharing those links with you right now. Before I go into Q&A, I would like to briefly talk to you about 5MB Academy. So after doing hundreds of cleanups and as I said, then I realized that, everybody keeps making the same mistakes. And now I understand what the problems are and why is it happening and how do I clean it up? I developed a proven system for diagnosing and cleaning up the books, which led to profitable and organized cleanups. Because otherwise, it was just crazy. It was like herding cats and just going in there like, why is this happening? I don't know. Why does the client have 20 bank accounts in QuickBooks when they gave you bank statements for 5? What are the other 10 accounts? I don't know. Why are there hundreds of, thousands of transactions in undeposited funds? Well, I don't know. How did that get there? So as I said, once I started doing this, I developed a proven system, which then really saved my sanity and allowed me to actually be able to be profitable in doing my cleanup projects. So as a result, I put together 2 courses and 2 cleanup courses that you will find on 5MB Academy. One is the QBO Pay Diagnostic Review System. So this is a complete process where I show you how to discover all the problems. So all these things, all the problems that clients have, and to be able to then give the client a report of findings and recommendations in order to, number one, qualify a good prospective client, ensuring that you get paid for doing a diagnostic review, again, presenting a report of findings and recommendations, and then having essentially a full scope of work for doing a cleanup and knowing how to price a cleanup. The second course that I put together is the complete QBO Cleanup system. So this is my full system and training for all the problems that you find and how to clean them up in QuickBooks, which is each course is very extensive. Everything that I teach is very step-by-step, shows you exactly what to do. And then we have actually our best-selling course, which is the bundle of the 2 courses. So the 2-course bundle actually gives you the best price for both courses. Let's see, the courses are online. So they are already recorded. You can access them at any time. You get full access to the course, whether you do the 1 payment, and we also have a 3-payment plan, but you get full access to the course regardless of the payment plan that you use. If you buy the diagnostic review course, you can always upgrade to the cleanup course at the bundle price. You just reach out to us. We'll do that for you. And you also have buy now and pay later options at checkout. And the cleanup course also includes membership in my private student group on Facebook, where that is the one group that gets, people use it all the time. They come across a certain client cleanup situation, they ask the question, and I will answer. So I answer you in the group and give you guidance and direction. All right. So if you're interested in the courses, we have a 10% discount. So if you use the coupon code 10 off in the checkout page, then you will get a discount on the cleanup courses and actually any other course on 5MB Academy. All right, so we're going to go through the Q&A now. So let me do a switch here to the Q&A tab. Give me 1 second to get that in front of me here. All right, and let me that in front. All right, so again, if you have a question for me, put it in the Q&A. And I think I have enough time to answer all the questions. We'll see. Sometimes it's hard. All right, so we have a question from my Abe. What do you do if there's a balance in undeposited funds from previous years when you take on a client's books? If there's a way to clear out that without negatively affecting the current or past closed books. So no, you cannot. There's no way to get rid of what's in undeposited funds without affecting income, generally income or a prior year adjustment. Because then it would be a one-sided entry and we can't do that. And so the method that I showed you is what you can use if you're fixing the current year. In my cleanup course, I go into all the considerations of which periods can you adjust, under what situations can you adjust, even discussing with the tax preparer, discussing implications with the tax preparer. But you have to clean up undeposited funds, and you have to then the balance has to go to another account to be actually cleaned out. And just as an FYI, that sometimes clients hire you to, well, I don't touch anything from another year, but clean up this year. But you have to consider balances on the balance sheet are carrying forward, and undeposited funds is one of those balances. So in that case, you really have to tell the client you have to also clean up the balance sheet. Kimberly is asking, how about matching the invoice directly with the deposit received in the bank? Is that incorrect? No. QuickBooks will record a customer payment for you in that situation. I'm not a big fan of doing that just because I like to have more control over the transactions that are being entered. Because the more that I let QuickBooks enter these things in the background, the less control I have over what it's actually doing. But in theory, does it allow you to do that? Yes. I'm just more, I always tell people I'm old school, but old school works, guys. And so I tend to follow the same process just so that it becomes second nature, as opposed to I have to stop and think about, should I do it this way or that way? Especially if you have team members or if you have contractors, at some point you want them to follow the same process, because otherwise there can be mistakes made. Uy is asking, can you please clarify when QBO creates a check when a money out transaction is entered through a bank feed? I'm more familiar with the expense transaction types created through the bank feed, not the check transaction type. So if you go to plus new and you select check, then QuickBooks is going to enter a check transaction, meaning in the US, and I'm not sure if you're in the US or not, we write a lot, still people write a lot of paper checks. In other parts of the world, they don't at all. And so it is more of a US thing where someone writes a paper check. And so the proper way to enter that in QuickBooks is to enter a check and enter a check number, and then to match it in the bank feed. You can, okay, so then you're going back to when I said that you could enter a check or an expense from the bank feed. I'm going to have to now rethink that workflow, because I may have said that incorrectly as far as entering a check from the bank feed, because I believe it will only enter an expense. Okay, and he's asking, on the account reconciliation tab in the QBO accountant books review, there are unclear transactions under outstanding transactions. These transactions are there because some of the balance sheet accounts were not reconciled, correct? Should we then reconcile the balance sheet accounts like fixed assets, partner distributions, etc.? Okay, I'm not a fan of the books reviewing QuickBooks. one thing you should understand about the features and functionalities in QuickBooks, and I've been around 15 years. I've been around QuickBooks that long. And so what you need to understand is that Intuit comes out with new features, and they give you kind of the bare bones, let's say receipts, okay, receipt capture, or the books review, or something like projects and other things. And so they give you the bare bones. And if enough people show interest in that feature, they will keep developing it. And if people don't, maybe are not as interested, or if maybe the management at QuickBooks decides that, we're not that excited about this, now let's do this other. What you'll see is that they'll come out with a feature and it's not working 100%, but then you also see that they're not doing anything else to it. So the books review, they haven't done anything to it in a few years. So that tells me that it's there, but they're not doing anything with it. And so I tend to not put all my eggs in those baskets, if you will, because sometimes what happens is that they get rid of those things, like tags. Tags are going away all of a sudden. And so so that's one reason why I don't really work with the QBO account, the books review. And the other is because it does those weird things, like it tells you have these unclear transactions in balance sheet accounts. So long story short, should you reconcile those other accounts? Not unless your client pays you to. So the only reason when at Mavency in my bookkeeping firm, when we would reconcile other balance sheet accounts, the only time we did it was when we had a client who reported their books on an accrual basis. And so that way we were then managing fixed assets, prepaids, amortization, depreciation, notes payable, and those types of things. So if your client is not paying you to do that, no. And also you're not required to reconcile those balance sheet accounts if the accounts are clean. Okay. Okay, that was a long answer. Jennifer is asking, can you use a reconciliation adjustment account for previous years? Okay, a lot. This is my, I get on this soapbox. No. Are people doing it? Yes. But the books aren't really cleaned if you throw things in a reconciliation adjustment account. That's just, you're just like taking it from one place and we're putting it in another. The only time I've been asked to do that, and actually it was called a prior year adjustment, was one CPA that asked me to do that in the 15 years that I had my bookkeeping business. In my complete QBO cleanup course, I show you the proper way to adjust either the current year or prior years to know how to make the determination of which periods to adjust, because there's things you have to consider, whether a tax return has been filed already, what the tax entity is that they're filing. Many times you need to discuss it with the tax preparer, but technically speaking, from an accounting perspective and even a tax perspective, there's no such thing as a prior year adjustment or a reconciliation adjustment. Natalie's asking, if we purchased the course previously, has it been updated recently? Depending on the course that you're talking about. So the QBO Paid Diagnostic Review has been updated, and the updates are already live in the course. So if you bought the course and if you go back into it, you will see the updates. I am updating currently the Paid Diagnostic Review template, and that will be uploaded within the next couple of weeks. And then the cleanup course will be updated in the next few months. But most of the content that is there it's still all relevant to what you're doing now, because the information is evergreen. Samuel is asking, is it not more appropriate to make it void rather than deleting? Yes, technically speaking, you probably sound like a CPA, and CPAs are told you need to void rather than delete. But QuickBooks doesn't always give you that option. And I believe when I was getting that screenshot that was showing me delete and not void, and I thought about saying something. But yes, technically speaking, it's better to void than delete if that is an option in QuickBooks. Annie says, I see from my client's books that they paid a lot of cash transactions. The client does not want to tie the transactions to a specific payee, just to leave it blank. What can I do about this? If they're really for cash, if they can tell me what the expense categories are for their cash transactions, that's the best I can ask, because they don't know otherwise, and they probably don't even know who they paid. I would tell the client that that may be an issue for 1099 purposes, or if they were audited by the IRS. I would tell them that in writing. I would save that. I would say I send an email letting them know those things, and I would save it in my permanent files in case for some reason they're audited. Then I would have documentation that I let them know that. But beyond that, you can't force them. And honestly, in my case, I made the decision to not take clients who will use cash just because it's such a pain. Trudy is asking, what do we do when the feed can't find a match? And that happens sometimes. And if you know that you have entered the transaction correctly in QuickBooks already, so if you're looking for a match, that would imply that the transaction is already in QuickBooks. I would actually exclude it from the bank feed, just because I know it's already in QuickBooks. So I don't necessarily need to have a match. But yeah, sometimes it just it won't work. And so you just exclude it from the bank feed. And of course, then it goes into the excluded tab in QuickBooks. And if you need to go back for some reason, try to find it, it'll be there. Another question from Trudy. Also, what happens when the client collects payments through QBO invoicing and payments? So that's for QuickBooks payments. In theory, the QuickBooks payments transactions are supposed to enter a customer payment and a deposit, but that doesn't always happen. So again, you have to understand the workflow that I showed you for undeposited funds, because it's the same workflow. And so we do see that, and did see it when we did cleanups for clients who used QuickBooks payments, that for whatever reason, QuickBooks wasn't entering all the transactions that it needed to. And then we went in and cleaned those up and entered them correctly. Chris is asking, on the negative deposit adjustment, do we add the customer it relates to or create a customer for these types of transactions? You can add the customer. I think mine said test customer. It doesn't really reflect it. Like if you were trying to think of an example, if you did a report of sales by customer, I think it's not necessarily going to show you that, but just so for documentation purposes that you know what customer that is for, you could do that. But that customer, actually, sorry, I'm a verbal processor, so sometimes my brain is working as I'm talking. Yeah, if you were cleaning up multiple undeposited funds, of course, that's multiple clients, you would have to have some sort of cleanup customer, but that does not affect the accounts receivable, aging, or other reports. So having a customer name in that negative deposit does not affect other reports, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, Alicia says, if someone has already purchased your cleanup courses, are the courses updated? I believe I already said that. The courses are updated for the negative deposit. When I update the course in the next 3-4 months, then I will include that as well. Let's see, Brenda is asking, will the negative deposit show the invoice attached to the undeposited funds as paid? Will the negative deposit Now, the invoice was already marked as paid because it's already in undeposited funds. So if you see something in undeposited funds, it means that the invoice was already marked as paid because a customer payment was entered. So if you look at the workflow for undeposited funds, you'll see that the first transaction is an invoice and the second transaction is a customer payment. And the customer payment is what marks the invoice as paid. Michelle is asking, what's the benefit of negative deposit method in the dummy bank account method? It's just to be able to clean out undeposited funds when you don't have the documentation to enter those deposits correctly. Jennifer's asking, how is the undeposited funds cleanup workflow different when client is invoicing from a different software and not using QBO? I probably need to do a different webinar on just working with apps. So apps change workflows in QuickBooks. And so when you're adding apps, most people think that I'm going to add an app and it's going to save tons of time and keystrokes and automate. And it actually will probably make a bigger mess unless you understand where it's inserting itself in the workflow. So the QBO workflow never changes. The app just puts things and may put things in different places. Great question, and I may just need to do a separate webinar on that. Victor is asking, my client creates a journal entry to pay an expense, but then it also comes in the bank feed. What is the correct procedure in order to not have duplicates? You shouldn't enter a journal entry. You should use the transactions that are in QuickBooks. So in that case, it would be an expense entry. So if you go to the plus new and then select expense, then enter the expense and then match it in the bank feed. There's no need for a journal entry. Annie's asking, what if after client paid for diagnostic and when we are reviewing the books, we are not sure how to fix it? That's why you need to buy my course because that's where I show you how to fix each area within QuickBooks. Or you can look at some of my free videos, but that doesn't necessarily cover and really does not cover all the considerations you need to have for which period to clean something up in. And of course, then you don't have access to me to help guide you along the way in my student group. Natalie's asking, can you give us an outline or script of what you say to them to convince that they need the paid diagnostic review? Look up my webinar from last month, Natalie. That if you signed up for it, look for the email and go to that webinar. I show you exactly what to say. I believe we just also published an article on my website. So Jill, can you share the link to our latest article, because that has the script and tells you what to say to the client. It's also included in my QBO paid diagnostic review course. Michelle is asking, do the courses show you how to price cleanups? Yes, the cleanup course shows you how to price cleanups, and then I will be updating the course and probably add more content to that as well. Annie's asking, I need to help my client to do the A2X Shopify and Etsy integration. Previously, we used manual journal entry with the account clearing method. Now we use A2X. I'm unsure how to map certain lines and how the previous account clearing will be cleaned up. Do I have any guidelines for this process? If you go to the Maven-C YouTube channel, it shows some of that, but you may need to just consult with the team at Maven-C to see if they can help you. And I feel like, I don't know if you and I emailed about this already, or maybe someone else was asking me the same type of question. Yeah. So reach out to Maven-C at mavenc.com and Jill, if you can put that link in the chat. And let's see, I'm going to go about 10 more minutes and answer as many questions as we have left. Denise is asking, is there a way to archive previous years on QuickBooks? No. On QuickBooks Online, no. You might want to start a new QuickBooks Online because it's probably really slow if you have that many transactions. If you're on QuickBooks Desktop, there are ways to archive previous years. I just don't remember how to do it because I haven't worked on desktop for quite some time. Jessica's asking, a client was DIYing their own books and set up their expense accounts as checking accounts on the balance sheet versus on the P&L. Can you advise on this? Oh, you could try to see if you can change the account type in QuickBooks, but I'm wondering if in there, because you have to kind of get inside their mind if they were thinking that, oh, if I have like an office supplies account, like if they think, I don't know if they enter the transactions correctly, is what I'm trying to say. But if you wanted to change the account from a balance sheet account to an expense account, you would change the account type through the chart of accounts if it lets you. I don't know if it will let you change a bank account to an expense account. And it sounds like it might be one of those that you need to check, and it may possibly be one that you need to start over if it's that messed up. Maricela is asking, how can I fix an off amount in QuickBooks from the bank? I checked journal entries and checked if they were cleared, and they are all reconciled. Where can I look? I've also looked for the amount. It was in case there was a transaction for it and I could not find it. So are we talking about the opening balance of the bank reconciliation being off, or are we talking about a bank reconciliation that is out of balance and you can't reconcile it? So let's start with the second one. If you're doing a bank reconciliation and you can't get it to balance, essentially where the difference is zero, I would go pull the bank statement. I'm going to go old school again. Let's pull that bank statement, and I'm going to go line by line on that bank statement and find it on QuickBooks. I'm going to unclear everything in my bank reconciliation. I'm going to go line by line on that bank statement, and I'm going to go line 1 and find the amount, line 2, find the amount. And that should show you where you're off. If we're talking about the opening balance being out of balance, QuickBooks usually shows you that. If you can't find it for $264, honestly, I would just probably, if I couldn't figure it out any other way, enter an adjusting entry just to make it rebalance and keep going. Let's see. Michelle is asking, sorry, I meant, is there benefit of the negative deposit method over the dummy method? No. They do the same thing. So it's just one is kind of the dummy bank account method has like a couple of steps, and you have to add a dummy bank account, and you have to then go here and go there. So it has multiple steps, whereas the negative method is just you just pull up the deposit and enter that line. So when I showed you guys the dummy bank account method, QuickBooks didn't let you add a negative deposit. So now they do, and that's why I switched over to the negative deposit method. Carrie's asking, do I have to have the QuickBooks certification to take the courses? So my courses, no. Having said that, you need to know your way around QuickBooks. My courses don't teach you how to use QuickBooks because I'm assuming you already know that. Okay. Now, and so it's not I'm not teaching you QuickBooks. I'm not teaching you bookkeeping, like basic bookkeeping. You need to already have those skills, but there's no need for you to prove to me that you have a QuickBooks certification. You just need to know, generally speaking, know your way around QuickBooks. Let's see. Uyi says, since cleanups are on a transactional basis, if you have a scenario where there are a lot of deposits created through the bank feeds into the sales accounts, in the cleanup scenario, do you have to delete these and create sales receipts? It depends on the type of client. So in the scenario that I was showing you earlier, if the client is invoicing through QuickBooks and then entering deposits, in that case, you follow the process that I already showed you. Let's say that we have a client that maybe they have a point of sale system, or they're doing e-commerce, where we might record deposits or sales receipts. I think it depends on it's a preference factor of what will give you more details. Sales receipts will generally then give you more information on customers, perhaps items, perhaps affecting inventory, whereas a deposit is just putting the money in the account. Will both of them put the money in the right account? Yes, if you're using the right account. It's just more, you have to consider then which type of transaction is going to give you the type of reporting that you want or need. Okay, Wendy's asking, when comparing with a new client, how do you determine whether a potential client needs a diagnostic review before you recommend one? So any client that has any kind of potential cleanup, they should go through a paid diagnostic review. So if they have books that if they started the books and attempted messed them up, but that goes through a paid diagnostic review. I have sometimes had clients who come to me for bookkeeping services and tell me that, hey, I've been working with a wonderful bookkeeper, but she's retiring, or whatever. I decided, in our case, my bookkeeper does not understand e-commerce, but the books are clean, and I want you to do the monthly bookkeeping. So in that case, I would look at the books for about 15 minutes. And I show you how to do that in my free Smart Review checklist that is on 5MB Academy. I just look at the books for 15 minutes. And if I find something wrong, then I tell the client that I need to do a paid diagnostic review. So 90% of the time, we end up doing a paid diagnostic review. And 10% of the time, they really did have a wonderful bookkeeper. So, all right, Denise. Sorry, I meant for archiving on QBO, not desktop. There's no way to delete or archive info from many years. Well, number one, so no, for QBO, you cannot archive, and you would not want to delete anything because that will mess up all your transactions going forward. So for example, all of your balance sheet accounts are cumulative. So if we go in and delete things from prior years, it will mess up your balance sheet. So you would not want to do that. So no. So you may want to start a new QuickBooks in that case. If it's slow, if it's lagging, you probably need to start a new QBO file. All right. Very good. Well, that ends all the questions. So excited to be with you today and share this new webinar with you, new method for cleaning up undeposited funds. We will be sending out the recording and the handout to you within the next 24 hours. And I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.